Here we go. Good afternoon and welcome to the latest edition of the Red Pilled Fiction Factory from a very hot and dry Yucatan, Mexico. Today's guest is from New Hampshire, and he, according to his bio on the internet, he's Fyodor Dostoevsky's favorite American writer. Evelyn Waugh rates him a savage, and Mark Twain says he's highly enjoyable. And today we're going to meet Michael Lacoy and discuss his novel Stay Safe from 2023. Hello, Michael. How are you?
Hello, Richard. It's great to be here. I've been looking forward to this for a long time.
What's the weather like in New Hampshire today?
It is absolutely miserable. This is why I'm moving. This is why I'm moving to Mexico.
Oh yes, we have to come on to that at some point.
It's very gray. It's cold. It's rainy. You know, it's spring, but it doesn't feel like it. It kind of feels like fall.
Well, it's an oven down here. The low tonight will be in the mid to high 70s. So the daytime temperature is over 100 right now. But still, we survive and we'll press on. Now, you are an editor, which is, I think, the first time one of our guests has been a writer and an editor. Okay. That comes across very much in your writing, which is extremely proficient and professional and embarrassingly good by the standards of most of us. But what else can you tell us about yourself and your background, where you're from?
Sure. As you said, I'm a professional editor and writer. You mentioned I live in New Hampshire. For 20 plus years, I lived in Boston and Cambridge, Massachusetts. I worked at Harvard for a bit. I lived in New York City for about 5 years. I went there first. I lived there twice. The first time was back in the late 1980s. And that was an extraordinary time to be in New York City. This is pre-9/11. It's pre-internet. It's pre-Giuliani, if you know New York. So it was really gritty. It was like a movie you see in the 1970s. It was still gritty. So for a young artist, it was heaven. You know, I was a young man. I had a lot of artist friends. We just lived the life. And I moved back there in 2007. I went to graduate school. I got I went for my MFA in oil painting.
Oh, right.
So, yeah, I have a whole nother parallel life. So I got my degree. I worked in the art world for a while. I worked for a magazine called, I worked for an art magazine, a pretty prominent contemporary art magazine that covers the Asian art market. And let's see, what else? So that was my master's degree. My undergraduate degree, I got a BA in English literature and creative writing. I did that at the University of New Hampshire, and I studied under two literary novelists, John Yount and Thomas Williams. They were fairly prominent in the 60s and 70s and 80s in the US. For example, Thomas Williams won the National Book Award, the American National Book Award. They built up the program, and some of their students included John Irving, who I'm sure you've heard of. Yep. Alice McDermott, she won a National Book Award. So I was very lucky to study with them. As for my own books, I've published 3 books so far, 3 novels. I'm interested. Well, do you want to go there, or should we?
Let's look at your biography a bit first. Where were you raised then? New Hampshire keeps appearing in the theme.
Yes. Yeah. So I was born here, and then I went. Like I said, I went to college, and then I went as soon as I could. I went to the big city because I always wanted to, I always wanted to go to the big city, New York or Boston.
To to ask if you lived in rural New Hampshire doesn't make sense, does it? Because all of New Hampshire is rural.
Yeah, yeah. Well, when I was a kid, the entire state was rural.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, the house that I grew up in, it used to be all woods around, primarily all woods, not the whole thing, but primarily all woods. And now there's, housing developments,
Right.
strip malls. It's really quite tragic.
Okay.
But no, it's a very beautiful state. Part of the state is on the ocean, and then we have the mountains. It's very, very beautiful state, and yeah.
Okay. So when did you start editing? After you'd done your second degree?
Yeah, my first job was I did an internship at a magazine, a big magazine in Boston, and the internship in the U.S. I don't know about in Britain or the U.K., but here they don't pay you anything.
Yeah, it's pretty much the same.
Yeah, so after 2 or 3 months, my plan was I would just then go off and find a job in editing. But they offered me a job, and in fact, they offered me good money. So I stayed there. So I started off in journalism. I worked for a couple magazines in Boston, and then I went into book publishing. I did publishing for a college textbook publisher. In fact, it was one of the first online college text publishers. In fact, it was quite it was kind of ahead of there was a big tech bust in the States back in I don't know, 2000, and this company went out of business, but they were ahead of the curve, so that was interesting. That was my first experience with a high tech type of editing, whereas prior to that it was just paper.
Right.
So yeah, and I've done all sorts of editing, books. I've done work for Harvard, different universities. So that's a different type of editing. Museums, lots of museums. I for a while there, I did a lot of work for museums in Asia, China and Hong Kong. They paid very well. Some art galleries in New York City, museums in New York City.
And did this editing job, I mean, if you're sitting there editing all day and you have slight literary instincts within your body, obviously it's going to grow and grow with every minute that you're at the keyboard. Is that what happened? You sort of...
No, actually, I would say it was just the opposite. Meaning when I was in college, when I was in high school, I wasn't interested in literature. In fact, I was pretty dense as a high school student, in terms of, I only read books because we had to read them. And then I didn't do it for pleasure, in other words. But when I went to college, I remember taking a course it was a humanities course, and we in fact we read Nietzsche, and I had grown up fairly religious, and with Nietzsche, one of the first things we read, God is dead, and I was like, you can't say that. Like, what does that even mean? God is dead. Like, what are you talking about? And it did set off a crisis. I mean, it's pretty comical now, but I was literally, my whole world was shaken. And then I just kept reading and reading and reading different things. And I'll never forget, I read Dostoevsky. You know, I found it, I read Crime and Punishment was the first one. I was a teenager, still in college, like at summer, summer break. And it made me profoundly depressed.
You picked the wrong books early on, didn't you?
I know. I just found it to be brutally depressing. But for some reason, I was colossally intrigued. And I just kept reading and reading. And then I remember I read Saul Bellow. He's an American, Nobel laureate. But he was writing in a more modern voice. Obviously, he's a contemporary. Contemporary in the sense of he was still alive when I was reading him. And I thought, and the reason that struck me was, I was like, well, maybe I could do this too. I mean, it didn't occur to me that Saul Bellow is a genius, right? And I was just some kid from New Hampshire who barely, had read any books in his entire life. But for some reason, these difficult books, these sort of highbrow books, they really kicked me in the butt. And I really turned me on. And then I was like, shit, I'm going to be a writer. I want to do this. And then so I went from, I was in the business administration program when I went to college. And then I switched because of this. I became I went into the English department, and I just started taking creative writing courses. And I'll never forget my first course. The kids around me, they were writing what I thought were really sophisticated stories, much better than anything that I was able to do. And I felt really embarrassed because everything I wrote seemed really stupid and just unsophisticated. But I just stuck with it because I loved it. And anyway, so that's a long story. So I got into fiction first, and I thought, well, since I like to read all day, why not get a job doing that? And that's what sort of eventually got me into editing.
And through editing, you gained confidence over time with your skills and decided eventually to become a writer full-time. Well, not full-time, but to dedicate yourself to writing a book.
Actually, I was writing quite seriously in college and after college. When I moved to New York, my big thing then was to get into the New Yorker. Like that was, we're still talking like 89, 88, 89, 90. And in those days, the literary culture was focused around New York. So if you wanted to be a writer, you wanted to get your story in the New Yorker or in Esquire or in the Paris Review, which was out of they had an office in New York. So I was writing. I was just terrible at it. I never sold a story. I kept sending them out. Kept writing.
They dedicated mostly to short stories, right now, the New Yorker and Esquire.
Oh yeah, completely short stories.
But also they have tremendous reputation for famous Norman Mailer and their like.
I mean, again, it was very naive of me. This is like the motif of my younger years. Instead of going for some small journal somewhere like the East Kansas Literary Journal, I was sending stuff to the New Yorker, which was dumb. They've got a slush pile this high, and most of 99% of those stories don't even get read. They just, they'll read like the first paragraph and they'll chuck them. And basically they'll publish Martin Amis, already John Updike.
Yeah.
So, but
So which was your first? You've written 3 books. One's called The Mystical Adventures of Stavros Papadakis, which I don't know
Yes.
about, and another is called Making a Better World, and then we'll come to Stay Safe in a while. But which was the first of the 3?
Stavros. That came out in 2019.
Okay, so
you do the math, you can see it took a long time. So from the late 80s to 2019. Now, prior to that, I published, I didn't publish, I wrote 2 novels.
Okay.
I tried to get them published with the big boys in New York, and it just didn't work out. And then various things happened in my personal life. I stopped writing. Then I went to art school, like I mentioned earlier. I put all of my energy into painting and making sculpture. And then something very strange happened in 2019. I woke up at like 3 in the morning one night. I had insomnia. I simply could not sleep. I was rolling around in my bed. I said, screw it, I can't sleep. I went to my computer just to check my emails. And I'm not joking you. The entire novel came to me as I was sitting at my computer. The whole story, the character, the story, everything. And my first response was, I don't feel like writing a novel. I said, whatever this is, just go away. So for the next 2 or 3 days, I kept getting this in my head, this story. I can't even explain it. It doesn't abide by the laws of physics. It was the whole thing. It was right in my head.
Amazing.
Sounds ridiculous. It sounds foolish to me. Maybe I have, yeah.
It's a terrific skill. If you could develop that skill, you could be brilliant for every book that you set about writing, because half the problem with writing a book is coming up with all that stuff.
Yeah.
And what is the novel
anyway,
about?
I just wrote it. Pardon?
And what is the novel about?
It's about it's set in Boston in contemporary times, in modern day times. It's about a corrupt defense attorney. He's highly successful, but he's also highly dysfunctional. He's made a complete mess of his personal life. So on Christmas morning, he lives in a high rise in Boston. On Christmas morning, he drives across the bridge into Cambridge to go visit his son at his ex-wife's house to exchange Christmas presents. And as they are doing this, he has a fatal heart attack. And then he's revived. And once the dust settles, he's in the hospital. He starts telling people that he had a near-death experience. And not only did he have a near-death experience, but he claims he met Jesus. And this is, of course, this is Cambridge and Boston. This is 2 of the most highly progressive places on planet Earth.
Yeah.
And of course, nobody believes him. And moreover, they find his story to be highly embarrassing. This is his family and his law partner. So they tell him, don't ever mention this. And, it's a comic novel, just to be clear. So it's all done with a sort of light touch. And so the whole point, the novel is, that's the inciting incident. That's basically chapter 1. So that kicks off the plot.
Very good. And the second novel, completely different from the title.
Yeah, Making a Better World. So just to be clear, my books are comic and satirical.
Yeah.
And my influences, like you mentioned, like I really like Yves Lenoir, his touch and the way he writes. Satirical, funny, not a lot of description. You like to turn the page, lots of dialogue, funny characters. So the second book, Making a Better World, similarly is set in contemporary times, but this one is set in New Hampshire rather than Boston. And this is a family drama, and the inciting incident for this book is there's a grandmother. She's in her 70s, or a mother, and she is a drinker, a smoker, a gambler, and she gets caught cheating at cards in her old folks' home, and they kick her out. Now she's poor, so she has nowhere to go. But she has two sons. One son is rich, one son is poor. And the problem is this is a very dysfunctional family. Nobody gets along. And the rich son refuses to take her in. So she ends up going with the poor son, who also has a daughter. He's a widower. And the poor son says, you can only stay for a week. That's the inciting incident. And this book originally was going to be a tragedy. I thought, well, my first book, it was kind of a comic novel. We'll change it up. We'll go with a tragedy this time. But I started writing it in the beginning of 2020, 2 weeks to you know what.
Yeah.
And as I'm writing the book, I started seeing everything start to fall apart. Society, institutions, families, relationships. And I thought, why am I gonna, deliver a tragic novel when everybody's already, in a bad place?
Yeah.
So I decided to make it into a romantic comedy.
Okay.
And I'm not giving away too much, because if you go to the book description, that's what it says on Amazon. So basically the book follows sort of a love triangle. And anyway, it's basically, if you're looking for a romantic comedy or a feel-good book that's a non-woke romantic comedy,
right.
This could be your book.
That sounds very interesting. It does seem then that dysfunctional families treated with a mixture of satire and comedy and tragedy is your evolving speciality, because we're going to come on now to your book, Stay Safe. Funnily, when I Googled your name to look for your Amazon page, the AI entry, which is now seems to be instant and automatic, it was quite good. It says his book Stay Safe is a dark comedy that explores the concept of safety in a scathing and satirical manner. The book is set in a world where two very different Americas exist, and it delves into the lives of the two characters, Cole Perrott, a frustrated college administrator. I laugh because his story is quite brilliant, and others as they navigate the complexities of their world. So in Stay Safe, as the cover, which is very well produced, by the way, and also the two words, Stay Safe, will immediately evoke memories 4 years ago when things took a turn for the worst worldwide. Yep. And it's obvious that was your inspiration for the writing of it. And it does address what I think it was Jefferson or Franklin or one of the founding fathers said about, if you look for security, you will overset freedom. You'll end up getting neither. Safety is a dead end, and it doesn't work for humans to seek it out. And that's one of the main themes that you address. But it also addresses the whole weirdness of the times.
Right.
Affirmative action are dealt with. But also very, in great detail, the masculine feminine dichotomy, dynamic, whatever you want to call it. So lots of topics covered.
Yeah, the book does kind of pack a multitude of issues. I'm not even sure where to start.
Well, you start at the beginning. Give us a rough idea of the plot outline.
Oh, you know what? If I could, I think a good place to start is the epigraph page.
Remind me.
The two quotes at the beginning of the book. The first, I have the book here. So
Yeah.
the first quote is from Habakkuk, the Old Testament prophet. And he says, I'll just read it. It's just one sentence. Excuse me. Look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed. For I am going to do something in your days that you would not believe, even if you were told.
Yeah.
Right? So that sort of sums up the macro story. Like what is happening to the country, what is happening to the globe. Like if you would have said 6 years ago that the whole world is going to come to a stop and economies are going to be destroyed, certain, choose my words carefully, certain mandates are going to be enforced that have never been done before. You know, nobody would have believed you. Of course, this is a movie type of scenario,
Yeah.
but not real life. So we're talking about a world historical event, right? This is worthy of a quote from the Bible.
Yes, indeed.
And it's not by accident that I chose Habakkuk is the author. And so for people who don't know that, he's an Old Testament prophet. Now, am I equating myself with an Old Testament prophet? No. But what was the role of prophets? Prophets were to call out when the people were acting contrary to God's will, or if they were being persecuted by other nations, to call out, you know, the king and the other of the. So, and they were frequently very unpopular because nobody likes to hear the truth, right? People want to be flattered and told how great they are. Yep. Nobody ever wants to be told that they're screwing up and they're, you know,
stupid.
So, exactly. So that was the first quote. The second quote, the first quote kind of gives the backdrop to the story.
Right.
Like what's coming, something big. The second quote is from Dostoevsky. It's a short one. I'll quickly read it. There is a certain class of people, very intelligent indeed, who sometimes have utterly paradoxical ideas, but they have suffered so much for them in their lives and have paid such a heavy price for them that it would be too painful, almost impossible to give them up.
Ain't that the truth?
This is from The House of the Dead, which is absolutely wonderful book. People don't talk about it that much, but it's it's another work of genius from Dostoevsky. But that quote, you know, think of coal, right?
Well, let's explain before you say that. The novel follows about a year or so in the life of a very traditional American modern liberal family.
Yes.
Cole and his wife Una,
yeah.
And then a young daughter called Rosa, and her elder brother Lucas. Lucas is the renegade, and Rosa admires Lucas and knows that Lucas is on the right track, even though she's not allowed to express that or follow his example.
Right.
So Cole is the father, and you're going to say he's the complete, typical Ned Flanders from Simpsons type, who, but much more in a liberal way, complete nutty, mask wearing, everything. Go on.
Yeah. So yeah. He's completely sold into his progressive ideology. And he accepts it uncritically. He takes it as a matter of course because this is what the establishment thinks, whatever the issue is, that it is obviously just and true. So And as his life starts to fall apart, he doesn't change course.
And it specifically falls apart because of his liberal principles in many ways. It's not just accidental with his life.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's built into the character.
Yeah. I'll give a good couple of quotes from the book, which I have to say is I think the most professionally written book I've read in all the series of these interviews. It's absolutely spectacularly proficient, your writing, but that's only to be expected given your career, I guess. But anyway,
Thank you.
Cole has just gone for a certain medical treatment which everyone was forced to do pretty much in the Western world a few years ago. And afterwards, out in the parking lot under the still blazing sun, father and daughter were in good spirits. Cole especially was in good spirits. They had done the right thing, he knew. They had affirmed their faith in science, aligned themselves with progressive opinion, and showed themselves to be morally upright citizens who were concerned for the common good. Yes, they had done the right thing, and it felt very good indeed, which is just perfect. It sums up the way so many felt. They're not feeling quite so good anymore, but that's something else we'll have to deal with.
Yeah.
Following on from this experience, he immediately turns to what really is the central focus of his life, his social media account and I love it. It's Face, Space, and Chirper, I think, are the two media sites he uses. Brilliant stuff. And he felt a frisson of excitement. He had a very good feeling about this one. His previous record for likes was a single social media post was 217 for something he had written on Chirper a year earlier, in which he had eviscerated the anti-beep morons, writing things like, "Stop coddling these criminals, lock them up, take their jobs and deny them medical services. They're endangering all of us. Enough is enough." Now that had been thrilling, Cole recalled, watching the like numbers go up and up and up as he additionally got many positive ego-bolstering comments from people who thought just like him. It was heady stuff, that rush, that feeling of euphoria, that feeling like he was important and universally admired. And now he had a feeling that this new post, which is about his daughter's treatment, might challenge his likes record, or even smash it and go viral. Who knows? It was possible. Anyway, Cole is a character for the ages. I think if we've had characters from the past that seem to sum up an era, Cole is it. And unfortunately for him, the other three members of his family are tempted to go down the path and instructed to go down the same path as him. They cannot bring themselves to do it, in particular the son Lucas. But gradually the wife and the daughter also break ranks with him.
Yes.
With consequences that are very funny for the first half of the book. And I laughed out loud at points. But then things get serious and it gets very dark and it's actually quite depressing.
Yes.
I admire that you managed to pull off A, the combination, but B, you were honest enough to deal with the dark side of all this. Because although it is hilarious, although we can laugh at Cole and his social the media likes and so on, what lies underneath all this is a horror story, and you bring that to the fore in the second half of the book. Would you like to dwell on the sort of dichotomy there and how you dealt with it?
Yeah, this was I knew it was dark and I knew it was hard hitting, but I have a feeling that I didn't realize how dark and how hard hitting. And I think that says something about me. And I'm not putting a value judgment on that. I just think that's how I am. In other words, I think I have a very dark sense of humor. So I think some of the things that I thought were funny, some people might think are disgusting or very, too dark. So yeah. So I thought, I am taking some risks here. But I have to admit, and I'll be completely honest with you, Richard, part of my motivation for writing this book was white hot anger.
Yes, good.
Yeah. So let's go there. So as I was writing this book, I personally was experiencing a lot of, I tried to help people avoid doing a certain thing. I was very reasonable. I presented evidence. I offered to help as many people as I could. Everybody around me did the opposite.
Yeah.
Every single person I know.
Yeah.
I had people calling me up, yelling at me.
Yeah.
Telling me I was being selfish. Telling me that I would always regret it. I had people calling me up trying to convince me by telling me, quote, their scientific reasons, all of which have proven to be false.
Yeah.
I was disinvited from certain gatherings. I was mocked.
Yeah.
To my face. Now, I want to be clear. I'm happy to be mocked. I'm happy to be made fun of. I'm just a regular person. But I was trying to be very helpful to people. And I tried to be as respectful of their choices as I could. And despite this, I received all this shit.
Yeah.
And so that was part of it. Another part of it was I was seeing my country, my town be destroyed right before my eyes.
Yep.
And I saw people going along with it and helping to make it happen.
Applauding as it happens.
Yeah. Well, like coal, they thought they were virtuous. They're freaking destroying the entire civilization. And they're proud of themselves as they do it.
Yeah.
Right? I couldn't believe it. Now, prior to this, I had never had what I would call bad thoughts about humanity. But after what I've seen over the past 4 years, I've had to rethink some things. That so many people would participate in their own destruction in a way.
Yeah.
Now, that's a strong word, destruction. But our society has been fundamentally altered.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure it's ever going back. And, what I saw was a colossal failure of leadership on a macro level and a micro level. On the macro level, I saw governments failing their people. I saw doctors failing their patients. I saw universities and schools failing their students. I saw
failing their family, failing their children.
That's where I was going to go. That on the micro level, I saw parents failing their children in many different ways. And I was absolutely furious that in my little circle, my social circle, friends, acquaintances, I don't want to name anybody. I'm not going to, obviously, it's hard to talk about because,
Yeah, it's very personal and very touching for everybody.
But it just made me furious.
Yeah.
And I thought, and I watched as people in the public eye, one after the other capitulated and went, caved in and went with the narrative. And I thought to myself, where are the freaking artists? Right now, the politicians are gonna take the money. The
Doctors.
newscasters.
Yep.
And unfortunately, the journalists all fell in line.
Yeah.
Right? Now, there was a time when journalism would call out power. Now they serve it.
Yeah.
Right? So slowly the dissenting voice pool is shrinking. And then I see somebody like, well, I don't know if we can use names, but famous rock stars, you know, forcing their audiences to do something in order to come and see, in order to have the privilege to come and see them. They have to do something, you know, serious. And various rock stars, these guys who in the 60s were singing about Vietnam, were now singing, talking and giving interviews, you know, very self-righteously, you know, saying the people who didn't fall in line were, you know, racist, idiots, you know.
Banned from their concerts, cancelled from their jobs, everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So my thought was, now to be clear, obviously there were voices out there on Twitter who were fighting this. But these people were having their reputations destroyed. They were losing their jobs.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, you know, I'm sitting like everybody else. I've been forced into isolation. And I thought, where are the artists, man? Where are the artists who are calling this shit out? Right? Where does nobody have any balls? You know, what's wrong? And so that's why I wrote this book.
Good, excellent.
It was written in anger, and if it goes too hard, too dark, you know, maybe that's why.
No, it needs to. We have to look at it objectively. This is not a game. This is not a joke. It's often very funny and farcical and absurd what we see in our daily lives.
Yeah.
That X is Y and upside down is up is down and everything else. But there are consequences for this irrationality and this illogic. And those consequences include death on massive scale, and we have to accept that. And
including for young people.
Yeah, and also in a terrible way. The lucky ones right now are getting a heart attack and don't know anything about what happened to them.
Right.
But there are children, these already with debilitating, life-changing illnesses that will spend 20, 30 years wondering what the hell happened. Right. Was this, you mentioned, this was the first time you looked at humanity in a slightly more negative light. Was this the red pilling moment of your life, or were you already, because I always ask this question in the chats, were you already red pilled and this just cemented and crystallized it?
No, I mean, I've always been suspicious of groups, and I've always been suspicious of power. And so even as a kid, I always side with the underdog. And I've always been like that. And so, but then there were things like, I was always interested in, say, you know, who killed Kennedy really?
Yeah.
Now, you know what's interesting about the whole Kennedy thing is that this is where we get the term conspiracy theorist.
Yes.
And it was literally created by a government agency. Starts with a C, ends with an A.
A famous one, yes.
Yeah. So then you have to ask yourself, why did they come up with this term, right? It's to discredit anybody from looking into things. Yeah. And of course, the culture, the people, they use the term precisely as the way the CIA wanted them to do it.
It's a pejorative that shuts you up.
Right. So it completely cuts off any sort of critical thinking. It's a way to slander people. And anyway, so I was a young man when I was vaguely interested in that. And then, you know, the Twin Towers and, you know, so slowly, I was on this path for a long time. And also I would say that I had some health problems.
Okay.
And these health problems led me to see a number of different doctors. And seeing these doctors, that they all ended up trying to get me to take different medications. And the more medications I took, the sicker I became.
Yeah.
And then finally, after 10 years of debilitating health, I started watching videos about people who went on all meat diet. It's a long story. I'll make it short. The short story is that I took myself off of all the medications. I changed my diet completely. I took myself off of all supplements. So I was just, for a while, all I was eating was meat and water.
Yeah.
And after a year, I got really healthy. So I had all of these doctors with all their theories of what was wrong with me, giving me their very toxic medicine, their very expensive tests, their very expensive visits.
Well, they've got to pay for all those Porsches somehow. Come on.
You got to pay for their golf clubs, right? Yeah. And this was another wake-up call. And lucky for me, this happened prior to 2020.
Right. So
I was already primed to say these morons are not gonna, I'm done with these people.
Good.
And so that's my red pill story, really. Trust me, I was prepared for this moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's go back to the book a little bit. I've described how the family lives the sort of idyllic, in inverted commas, modern, progressive, suburban life. All that's brought crashing down when a new neighbor moves in, called Mike, who's a MAGA prototype with his muscles and so on. He's also a very successful YouTuber on issues of masculinity, which chimes very much with the boys' thoughts on these matters. Tice is a fantastic character. The contrast between the two is fantastic. What unravels what follows because of the contrast is fantastic. A little quote from Tice. He's talking to the younger boy. He says, "Deep down, Lucas, today's man knows that something isn't right, and it hasn't been right for some time. But rather than investigate this, rather than do a deep dive and search for the truth of how the world really works, he prepares to go along with the crowd and maybe tell himself a few lies so he doesn't have to face any uncomfortable truths, so he doesn't have to take a stand and fight, so he doesn't have to give up his porn and his football on Sunday and his 1,000-inch TV and his pointless job. Better to conform and swallow the lies than to jeopardize his easy life." And there's a lot more of this very hard-hitting, very clear, very useful, very informative passages from Tice. He's almost like a voice from heavens to redirect the confused and the lost. And tell us a bit about who is Tice? Who is he from your perspective? Is he somebody will never? Is he the John Wayne from the past that's long gone, or?
Well, Tice is a complex character. I mean, for example, he does speak a lot of wisdom, which is why he's become famous. When I was writing the book, there was the manosphere.
Yes.
Was pretty big on the internet. Now, as I was telling you earlier before we started filming, I'm not very tech savvy. And for example, I only joined Twitter like 5-6 months ago. And I had no idea about that whole scene. Like I didn't know Ren, I didn't know the whole scene. And but I was aware of certain people on YouTube. Like there are these guys on YouTube who teach you about health and fitness, and they give relationship advice. you know, there's a guy called Andrew Tate. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Sure.
Okay. So he was big. So I thought, you know, a lot of these guys, they get a lot of shit from, you know, the left-leaning power structure. And so I thought it'd be interesting to have that type of character. And, you know, he does have his flaws, of course.
He does.
And, you know, there is a problem with, how do I put this? You know, sometimes if you're really successful at something, you can go overboard. I don't want to give too much away, but you know, for example, he's very successful with women.
Yes.
And you know, that's probably his Achilles heel. So in the end, he's not quite the role model for Lucas.
Why did you do that? I was interested because if I was writing the novel, I would have made him less flawed. Because he's the sort of golden boy hero archetype that's moved into the story and changes it for the better in some respects. Why the focus on him being he is quite flawed in many. He's an anti-hero in the classic sense. He's nowhere near the idyllic hero. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Why?
Yeah. Why did you make him so flawed?
Because, well, first of all, just from a strictly artistic point of view, you know, you want to have characters that have good characteristics and bad.
Make it more interesting, basically, I understand. But I thought maybe you'd be a little less damning.
Yeah. You know, it's possible I made a mistake there.
I don't know. It's going to be a mistake. Yeah. It's certainly interesting because it does challenge you. You keep thinking, oh, I didn't expect that.
Yeah. Are you talking specifically? Well, yeah. What are you talking?
Well,
are you talking about his with the women?
Yes, he leaves a trail of destruction, not just with the women, just about everything. And he ends up being quite destroyed himself in a very hilarious, dramatic scene. But normally, you bring in that kind of hero, and he's much more of a, you know, John Wayne kind. He's straightforward. He keeps it clean, and you go away with a feeling that both his message and the man melded well. With Tice, we get the feeling the message might often be right with it, but it doesn't necessarily gel very well with the personality.
Yeah, no, I definitely understand what you're saying, and you make some very good points. Maybe what I was thinking was, you know, first of all, this is a black comedy. It is a satire, and you know, Cole is so, you know, kind of pathetic that to have Tice be perfect, it might just be too neat.
I understand.
And you know, the good guy, the bad guy, but you know, I think Tice's flaws, I don't think they take away from his good things that he does.
Yeah.
And you know, I think there's a lot of us who have good qualities, but I'll speak for myself. You know, I try to be good, but sometimes I'm not good. And you know, we have things to, whatever. I just didn't want to have a perfect character. Let's just say that. Yeah.
That makes sense. the overall result is a fantastic piece of work. So I'm niggling at sort of details here. I really recommend this to anybody. I was gripped, and yet it's the last type. The type of books I normally appeal to do not take place in suburban New Hampshire with a family between the neighbours. Let's put it that way. But I was totally swept away by that, the whole thing, and I recommend it to anyone. What's the next book going to be about, Michael? Have you got one in mind?
I was thinking about doing. I've got a couple things that I'm thinking about, but not ready to be shared yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
You work quite fast. You produce a book a year, more or less, by the look of it. So
that's with a full-time job.
Yeah. So we're looking at another year before we can see something from you.
Possibly. Yeah.
Did you approach any publishing houses this time round, or you just knew that the subject matter was going to deem you unworthy of their attentions?
Yeah, the mainstream publishing, it's so, for lack of a more creative way to say it, it's just completely woke.
Yeah.
And, I'm a straight, white, Christian guy, and I'm unapologetic about all three accounts.
Yeah.
And they just don't want anything to do with people like me.
No.
And that's, it is what it is. This is the opportunity for smart businessmen.
Yes.
Because there's this whole talent pool like me. There's hundreds of guys like me who have been marginalized by the establishment powers that be, who have talent. I'm not including myself, but there's a lot of talented guys out there.
Sure.
Who are just sitting on the sidelines, and all it needs is some like take Passage Press. Do you know Pat? They're going to do gangbusters.
Yes.
They will do gangbusters. And there will be other publishers that copy their model. And I can't wait to see it.
Yes.
Because they have all these talented people. Imagine this. Imagine you have all of the best soccer players on the planet, but because they're not woke, because they refuse to wear a rainbow armband, they all get kicked out of the league.
Yeah.
And then they bring up all of these second string losers to be the team. And then you've got all these talented people. Some smart businessman is going to say, hey, I'm going to have it. This is going to be my team. And that team's going to kick the shit out of this other team. So that's what I'm looking at. I want to see this in movies, in books. Yeah.
I'm very encouraged by that. And it ends the show on a perfect high note. And on that matter, funnily, earlier today on Twitter, I saw how, I think it was The Simpsons or one of those cartoon shows, has now been given to AI to reproduce using lifelike characters. And the product is outstanding. You immediately want to watch this lifelike Bart Simpson.